Usually this sort of long-form, unscripted type video isn't something I pursue, like these sort of long-form discussions. Scripted videos are my jam, and then on occasion I'll put out an unscripted video if it's like something I want to really talk about, but I don't have time to script a video, or it's just happened, you know? But this is like a special case, because there has been so much information about the Switch 2 pricing that's been coming out, and it's just been like this evolving story, you know? Like over the past 2 weeks, we've had so much info come out, so many responses from Nintendo, so many different interpretations from fans, misinformation, different types of communication, you know? So I just wanted to talk about everything, basically. I've gathered everything that I believe to be relevant to Switch 2 pricing discussion, so, you know, system price, game pricing, Switch 2 editions, just Nintendo's response to everything, and I just wanted to talk about literally everything. So that's what we're going to be doing here. It's kind of a one-stop shop. If you haven't been keeping up with Switch 2 pricing info, you can learn everything you need to know. If you do already know everything about Switch 2 pricing info, then you can hear me talk about it. So first things first, gotta cover the system price, $450 US. Here's the thing, right? That is more expensive than we thought it was going to be. I think pretty much everyone was going into this direct expecting the 400 price point, you know, 400 USD, gotta specify, because the system is like $630 for us in Canada, which is very fun. But yeah, I think everyone was going into this expecting, or maybe more accurately hoping for the 400 USD, because that seemed like a really good price point, especially in comparison to competitors and based on the level of power that we thought the system would have, right? So 450, it definitely stings coming from that point of view when we were expecting something lower. That said, of all the things present in this video and all the different pricing related things going on, it's kind of the least offensive, you know, or one of the least offensive elements of the whole thing, because at the very least, a system is a one-time purchase, you know. A system is not an a system is an ecosystem, but a purchase for a system isn't part of like the ecosystem that you're gonna have to be contributing to for the next however many years, you know. You buy the system, you play the system for the next, you know, Switch 2. That's probably gonna be at least. Switch lasted for 8 years. I'm expecting at least 8 years for this. And then it's not like you just immediately throw away your Switch 2 once the next system comes out. So at the end of the day, it's kind of like a life investment, or at least a, you know, 20-year investment, however long you want to be playing your Switch 2 for. So from that point of view, I kind of like, you know, 450 is not great, but it's not as bad as it could be, especially because that's another thing. This is pretty nice. The system is actually more powerful than we anticipated. We were already, like, we had some pretty high hopes for the system. You know, there are all those rumors that were like, you know, it's going to be above a PS4, it's going to be PS4 Pro. Some people were saying it's going to be Series S level. You know, there was all this debate about exactly where it was going to fall. But essentially, basically, everyone was just being like, okay, it's going to be above a PS4. And for most people, that was enough. For most people, that was like, that's really all we need from a Nintendo system and for what Nintendo will be able to take advantage of. I mean, we've seen some Nintendo studios pull off incredible things just on the Switch. You know, Monolith Soft, they obviously stand out. And then Retro Studios with Metroid Prime 4, from what we've seen, I mean, obviously the Switch 2 version looks better, which we'll talk about. But on the Switch, ooh, that's a good looking game, right? But the Switch 2, being more powerful than we thought it was going to be, that's a pleasant surprise. The fact that it supports 120 FPS in handheld mode, I didn't expect that at all. HDR 120 FPS. The fact that Metroid Prime 4, you know, to be fair, it's a Switch game, but like Metroid Prime 4 having like the quality mode versus performance mode, 4K 60 versus 1080p 120, right? That is a really nice feature to have. That's nice, right? And that definitely cuts the pain of the 450 price point a little bit, right? But that's something else that we had to talk about that kind of led to this whole situation. It's just like the communication on Nintendo's end, right? It really has not been great. And I think that they've fostered a lot of the misinformation that is currently going on by just not being transparent about everything in relation to pricing. And especially because in the Direct, right? The Switch 2 Direct felt really confident, you know? Like all of these, you had all these third parties coming out and saying, we're about this system, you know, compared to the Switch presentation of 2017, where like it felt we were fighting to get some third parties out there. For this one, it's like back to back to back, just insane third parties saying like, hey, we're putting some of our biggest games on the system. You know, you had like Elden Ring, Street Fighter 6, like all these back to back major reveals, Final Fantasy 7, you know? It felt very confident, and that confidence extended to how Nintendo was handling their own reveals, and obviously, like, the reveal of the system. Like, when they were going over the system specs and everything, it felt like they had a lot of faith in it. It felt like they were recognizing the fact that this was a very, you know, this is a machine worth having. When does Nintendo ever really talk about specs specifically? Like, the fact that they came out here and said, like, yeah, we got 120 FPS, we got 4K, we got HDR, you know? It felt like they were really recognizing the value of their own hardware, and then obviously the games, right? Mario Kart World looks insane. We'll talk about that. Donkey Kong Bonanza, that's probably my favorite reveal of the whole thing. Sorry, Deltarune. But I guess the more I sit with it, Donkey Kong Bonanza just looks incredible. That is probably the biggest takeaway of the Direct for me. Kirby Air Riders, Hyrule Warriors, right? Like, the software they were presenting also had that level of confidence with it, where we were seeing these crazy new games. So the fact that they weren't willing to divulge anything related to price in it really countered that confidence. It felt like they were scared, you know? It felt like they recognized the fact that, like, it wasn't ideal, and they thought that that was going to be, like, taking away from their presentation, you know, what was otherwise a banger presentation in terms, you know, freezing and audio issues aside. It felt like they were worried about the impact that would have, but in hiding that, or not hiding, but, you know, in not making that evident, everything related to price, it just made that impact so much worse. If Nintendo just came out and said, hey, you know, this system is $450 for what we are presenting with this system, for the quality that we are giving, and for the ecosystem that we are letting you step into with this system. We feel like that is a fair price. We feel like that is a fair price for what we've put into it, for the technology, for the games that we're going to provide. That's just how it is, right? Would that be ideal? Still no. Obviously, people wouldn't be too happy about it if they were expecting 400, but it would be so much better than what we got, because at least they're being upfront, you know? And it maintains that level of confidence that we saw throughout the rest of the presentation. But the fact that they had everything just spread around on websites and everything, people had to go find the 450 after the fact. I don't even think it was on Nintendo's website where we first found it. I think it was in an article that covered it that we first found out about the 450 price point. It just wasn't great. Communication was not clear. And looking back to the Switch presentation in 2017, they were so upfront with everything, you know? Instantly, we get the $300 price point, which at the time, you know, that was really nice. And everything else was covered in full in the presentation, essentially. Obviously, we got certain information after the fact. I'm pretty sure we didn't even see Mario Kart 8 Deluxe until after the presentation. But the fact that they were transparent with the pricing, it felt like they knew that the price point was worth what they were providing, you know? With the Switch 2 thing, it just didn't feel the same way. And I think that led to a lot of the misinformation we are currently seeing, especially in regards to game pricing, which is the next thing we gotta talk about. So, Switch 2 game pricing. Here's the thing. The system price, like we talked about, that is one thing. I think if the system price was the only, you know, perceived outlandish price points that we had to deal with, the response would not be anything similar to what it is now, especially if Nintendo had communicated that and Nintendo was just like, yep, Switch 2 is $450, right? If it was just that, if that was the main thing, I don't think we'd see any of the response we're seeing now. Unfortunately, that was not the main thing, right? Because Mario Kart World is $80. And okay, first things first, we have to be at least glad that the rumored, the misinformation started that Nintendo had this disparity between online and physical purchases, and that it would be $90 and it would be $90 for the actual game card. That's not true. Thank goodness that's not true. Just $80 all around. That said, this whole thing, it's not great, is it? It's not, because here's the thing, right? Mario Kart World, that game looks incredible, right? I'm consistently impressed with everything they've shown for it. It feels like exactly what we needed in a post Mario Kart 8 Deluxe world, you know? Because Mario Kart 8, incredible game, right? Especially 8 Deluxe, and especially after the Booster Course Pass. By this point, it is kind of inarguably the greatest Mario Kart game, because the gameplay is phenomenal. On top of that, there's just the sheer amount of content in the game is kind of outrageous, right? This feels like exactly what we needed after Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Mario Kart 8's 11 years of presence, because you couldn't just do Mario Kart 8 again, right? You couldn't just have Mario Kart 8 but better and kind of more, I guess. I don't even know how you do more after 8 Deluxe and 96, or was it 96? No, yeah, 96 tracks, right? I don't see how you do that after the fact. Mario Kart World, this is exactly what they needed, right? A shakeup. Just completely different, completely new and fresh, and it looks incredible. The whole the whole open world thing, driving to each track, that is constantly blowing my mind just every time I see footage of it. And it's just Grand Prix, you just go from track to track, just everything. I've been impressed with everything we've seen. Obviously, visually looks spectacular. Just very expressive, cartoony. This is sort of the Mario visual era that Wonder started to bring in, where they're kind of cartoonifying everything more, which obviously feels very in line with what Mario should be. And just the quality of everything, you know, even though we're going in this cartoonier direction, we still have just the visual fidelity from 8, which 8 is already a great looking game, but this is just, it blows it out of the water, you know? So that's great. And then just everything else about presentation, the music, we've been picking up on, like, people have put together lists of the amount of just like remixed Mario Kart tracks, and that's the thing. People undercut the sorry, this is supposed to be a pricing video, kind of just hyping up Mario Kart World now. It's relevant, I promise. But people are always undercutting the impact of just soundtracks, you know? Soundtracks are consistently some of the things that hype me up the most about a release, especially a release like this. Mario Kart World, people have been picking up on free roam soundtracks that take like tracks from Mario Kart history, they take tracks from Mario history in general, you know, like the expanded franchise. People picked up on Wario World remixes in there, right? That is crazy. And they're all done by the Mario Kart band, one of Nintendo's best musical teams. I know the entire thing is going to be immaculate, right? So essentially, Mario Kart World, yeah, it looks amazing, right? No notes on that front. Give me egad, but whatever. But $80, the thing is, this needs to be the biggest Nintendo game of all time. Full stop. This, for that price point, this has to be just the biggest investment Nintendo's ever made for the biggest product they ever have made. And looking at it, you know, we have the Mario Kart World Direct coming up later this week. I'm confident that they still have more to show. But looking at it, you know, at the end of the day, it's Mario Kart, right? Like, Mario Kart is great. I love Mario Kart. But do I have faith that this is going to be the biggest Nintendo game of all time? I don't know, man. Especially, you know, coming off the heels of a game like Tears of the Kingdom, or the amount of Xenoblade games that we've gotten over the past decade, right? Like, looking at it, I just don't know. And the thing is, with Tears of the Kingdom, right, that was a different situation, because Tears of the Kingdom being $70 US, the thing is, I talked about that at the time, and even then I was like, I just don't know about this, especially because it was before we got that big story trailer for Tears of the Kingdom. So even the stuff we had seen, you know, I was struggling to figure out whether or not that price was justified. And Tears of the Kingdom is an enormous game with an enormous amount of like possibilities and things to do. So at the end of the day, I think it did like a decent job. Like, I don't think a ton of people who bought Tears of the Kingdom were dissatisfied with the product it provided for that price point. But the thing with Tears of the Kingdom is that it felt like an exception, you know? Tears of the Kingdom being $70 came in 2023, so we were basically at the end of the Switch era by that point. Tears of the Kingdom was one of the final, like, big Switch games, you know? Or final big Switch exclusives. So having that price point, it wasn't great, but you could make the argument that, okay, it's a one-time thing for the Switch. This really feels like Nintendo's just being like, hey, you know, we spent all this time and money on this. We're hoping that this will provide an experience that is worth that price. And that felt more justified. But the fact that Mario Kart World, it's tough because it's coming at the beginning of the generation, you know? So there really isn't that level of understanding that this might just be a one-time exception, because you're kicking it off with it, you know? So it's more so, the messaging feels more so like, hey, this is something we're going to do sometimes, instead of, hey, this one game is so enormous and incredible that we are going to charge more this one time, you know? Like, it feels more so like it's setting a precedent, especially because the industry has not done this yet, you know? Obviously, there's going to be some exceptions to pricing in terms of bundles and collections and whatever. They just announced Last of Us, like, 82, but it's still the 2 games, and like that's gonna be however much money. You know, that's a bundle, that's a different thing. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that a AAA company is charging $80 straight up for a AAA game, right? So it's also just ushering in this new era of game pricing that isn't great, because especially, you know, in the economic state of everything, that's not great, and it just doesn't feel like an exception by this point. Like, the messaging just isn't the same. It feels like it's leading to more of this instead of being a one-time thing, you know? I just don't think that's kicking off the system with, like it is the first Switch 2 exclusive, you know? It is the first one, and it's $80. Not only is that just not great from a consumer perspective, but I also just don't think it has a great message to it, you know, which I think is going to be a running theme of this video. I don't think Nintendo's messaging pricing-wise has been very good, and, you know, that extends past communication just to, like, choosing the prices themselves. But, you know, we'll talk about that more. We actually have a response from Nintendo on the whole Mario Kart pricing situation that comes from Doug Bowser. People kind of been going crazy with this. But he argues that it's basically just a variable pricing thing, and I have the quote here. So he said, "What you see right there is variable pricing. We look at each game, really look at the development that's gone into the game, the breadth and depth of the gameplay, if you will, the durability over time, and the repeatability of gameplay experiences." So he's essentially trying to argue that Nintendo's pricing it's not just going to stick to one sticker price. It's not just going to be $80. And you've already seen that with like Donkey Kong Bonanza. Donkey Kong Bonanza, $70. $70, I think that's what everyone was anticipating Switch 2 games were going to be, because that's the industry standard at this point for just like a AAA experience. Donkey Kong Bonanza, 70 at it looks like this big 3D platformer. I don't really have as much of a problem with that, right? Mario Kart is the main point of contention. And the essence of Doug Bowser's argument makes sense, right? It makes sense to me to look at each game and the time that's gone into each game and use that to dictate what the price is going to be. But here's the thing, right? Variable pricing needs to be variable pricing, right? Variable pricing can't just be, all of our games are $70 and then we go $80 when we feel like it, right? Variable pricing needs to extend across the entire catalog of Nintendo games, and Nintendo has not been good with that to this point. So it doesn't really inspire confidence that they're suddenly going to be good with it going forward. And we've seen this throughout the Switch era as well. Nintendo very much recognizes the value of their brands, right? You look at a game like Metroid Prime Remastered, right? It's an incredible remaster, looks incredible, one of the best looking Switch games, even though it's supposedly a remaster from the GameCube era, right? That game, what was it, like $40 USD, right? Which is $20 off their conventional AAA pricing, right? That feels like variable pricing, right? But then, on the other side of the coin, they'll sell a game like Princess Peach Showtime for the full $60 USD price. And it feels like they're doing that because they recognize the fact, like, not because Princess Peach Showtime had as much work put into it as Breath of the Wild, which is also $60 USD, but because they recognize the fact that it's a Mario game. So it's going to sell at that price and, they can get away with it. So variable pricing, it can't just be like Mario Kart also feels like an extension of that. It's Mario Kart World. Is it really the biggest game Nintendo has ever made to this point? If we're coming off the heels of a system that had Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and Xenoblade X more recently, is this really the biggest game Nintendo has ever put out? Or is it a big game, absolutely a substantial release, but one that they recognize can be $80 because it's Mario Kart, which is now like their best-selling series. So, they know they can do it. It feels more like the latter, and I'm very much hoping that the Mario Kart Direct is able to prove me wrong on that front. It would be nice to have some more major characters, put in Prince Florian from Mario Wonder. He just happened, right? The thing is, that's a tangent. Can't go down the whole Mario Kart roster tangent. I'll have to say that for another video. But yeah, variable pricing. I hope we actually see that evidence throughout the era. So when we get the next 2D Mario, even though I'm sure it's going to be great, 2D Mario games are some of the best in the industry, I hope it's not $70 like Donkey Kong Bonanza, because I guarantee Donkey Kong Bonanza had more put into it than the next 2D Mario. That's not a dig on the next 2D Mario, it could still be incredible. Wonder was amazing. That's just the nature of like 3D, 2D development, And I'm not claiming to be an expert, but obviously, we can tell there's different amounts of effort and just time in general going into some of these games. So hopefully Nintendo acts like that's the case instead of, variable pricing just meaning $70 games plus 80 on occasion, On the subject of Doug Bowser, though, I do find it interesting that he's basically become this sort of fall guy for Nintendo as of lately. Like, obviously, they're not positioning him in that way, but the fact that he's like one of the only people that's commenting on the situation in regards to pricing has kind of turned him into a fall guy. Like, basically everyone that I've seen complain about Switch 2 pricing has done so in referring to Doug Bowser. Like, Doug Bowser, like, why would you do this? Doug Bowser, I don't really know why you're doing this. You're ruining the reputation of the company. And I'm like, the thing is, like, obviously I'm, Doug Bowser, he's like COO of Nintendo America. I'm not gonna go crying, oh, poor COO Doug Bowser. Like, I'm sure he's doing fine. But at the end of the day, Nintendo America, right, is always gonna be an extension of just Nintendo, which is in Japan. I don't think it was Doug Bowser's decision to set the pricing this way. I think he's kind of just like rolling with the situation at hand, and obviously, he's trying to come up with good reasoning for everything to communicate to press and to fans and everything. So I get it from that perspective. I don't really get the whole Doug Bowser's to blame for everything thing, because at the end of the day, I think it's just, if you're gonna blame someone, blame Nintendo. I don't think there's necessarily a figurehead that you need to go after, and if there is, I don't know if it's Doug Bowser. But speaking of figureheads, that also brings us to Reggie's involvement in this whole thing. Funnily enough, because And in the midst of, we have the whole Welcome Tour thing, which we're covering, a game that everyone believes should be a pack-in, and Nintendo is instead charging for. And in the midst of all that controversy, Reggie decided to retweet one of his old stories about how he really fought for Wii Sports to be packed in with the Wii in America, or in America and Europe, and how, he fought tooth and nail for that. He had to go against Miyamoto and Iwata, and none of them agreed, and he was really the one that made it happen, And it's a really good story. Obviously, it ended up being very successful for Nintendo, so it was the correct move. And I think everyone agrees that the Nintendo Switch Welcome Tour, that situation, I think that's one of the worst looks for Nintendo in this whole thing, honestly, because the thing is, it does not matter as much as these other things. It doesn't matter as much as the system price. It doesn't matter as much as the game prices. It doesn't matter as much as the Switch 2 edition prices. It's just a bad look, it doesn't feel right. At the end of the day, I think you have to ask yourself, if you're Nintendo, you just have to ask, is the message we're sending with this really worth the amount of money we'll gain, Nintendo Switch Welcome Tour is essentially an instruction manual with mini games, So to have that as a separate charge, not only are you completely, you're very much limiting the amount of people that'll get to experience this game, if you can call it a game, the amount of people that'll get to experience this is being heavily limited, but also, it's just not sending a good message. It feels grimy, it just doesn't feel good to have such a small experience not be packed in, especially when you look at past systems, even ignoring the Wii and Wii Sports. I think that's a different situation, which we'll get into in a little bit, but even ignoring that, you look at a system like the 3DS, right, that had Street Pass Me Plaza in those games, that had AR games, it had a camera, it had all these other little things that, even if you didn't have a game for the system, you could just find enjoyment in these little things. And those things looked like they had way more value and also style, than Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. I just don't see any world where that is worth the asking price, and I don't think it was a smart move. That's the thing, as you'll notice throughout all of this, it was kind of just the perfect storm of pricing issues to breed controversy, if it was any one of these things that happened, or even two, I really don't think we'd see the response that we're seeing right now. But it was all of these things coming together that really led to the sort of PR situation that the Switch 2 is currently having, on top of other things that were out of Nintendo's control, and we'll talk about those later on as well. But going back over to Reggie and the Switch 2 situation, and, it's kind of had this whole response where people are bring back Reggie, if Reggie was here, this wouldn't be happening. And here's the thing, right? I love Reggie. We all love Reggie. The character that Reggie played throughout Nintendo's history, right, was iconic, and, we all love that. But I really don't think that much would be different right now. Everyone's if Reggie were here, none of this would be happening. If Reggie were here, the Switch 2 would cost 2 pennies, and you'd be able to do all of this. And genuinely speaking, I really think that the only thing that would be different if Reggie was here for the Switch 2 era would be the Welcome Tour. I think the Welcome Tour would be included. I don't think that'd be a separate charge. Everything else in relation to pricing, I think would be the exact same, and here's why. Reggie, throughout his time at Nintendo, Reggie predominantly was tasked with pulling them out of failure, right? He arrived just in time for the Wii era, and that was pulling Nintendo out from the GameCube's failure. Then they had 5 really good years of Wii, right, where Wii was at the top of its game, Nintendo was doing really well, they had this really good casual market. Then we pivot to the 3DS failure, and on top of that, the Wii U failure, which was worse. So now Reggie is once again in this in this underdog position, or he's on the back foot, he's really trying to make it work. And then, at the end of his career, beginning of the Switch era, leading into that, he's still pulling Nintendo out. He's trying to get them out of this tough situation, and succeeded at that, and then he left, He's never been in a position like Doug Bowser, where Nintendo, even just looking at Nintendo's profit from the Wii era, it is not close to what they're doing in the Switch era, So he's not been in a position where these calls would have to be made, these specific calls. That's why I'm saying I think the Welcome Tour, I think that would be somewhere where he would use his influence, and I think that could be different. But in terms of Switch pricing, $450, Switch 2 games like Mario Kart 80, I really don't think that would be different, because I think that comes from Nintendo, that is a Nintendo headquarters, that is a big Nintendo thing. And the thing is, with the Wii era, coming off the GameCube, and then Wii U era especially, and then Wii U leading to Switch, consumer relations was a top priority, right? Because Nintendo was not doing great. Obviously in the Wii era they were, but that was pivoting from failure, so they had to get consumers back on their side. So everything that they did, they had to really value the consumer. And that was really good for us, right? Like from the perspective of being valued for our dollar or whatever, that was great. But looking at Reggie's era, like, it's not like he was solely this arbiter of we had the famous 3DS price drop that happened because it simply wasn't selling at its 250 price point. They dropped it to like 170. That happened under Reggie, right? So I just think it's weird to pretend like Reggie, he's still the COO of Nintendo of America. He's gonna try to prioritize the profit of the company above all else, like Doug Bowser is currently doing. The difference is that Doug Bowser is in a position where they can now get away with this type of pricing, whereas Reggie wasn't, and it was more valuable to focus on the consumer. So I think that's more so a consequence of the era of Nintendo, more so than the person who was in charge of one specific branch of Nintendo, not to undersell the importance of Nintendo of America, but one specific branch of Nintendo at that time. So I think if Reggie were here, Welcome Tour probably would have been packed in. I don't think that much else would be different. We've still got a decent amount to cover. Okay, Switch 2 editions, right? That is the next big thing I want to talk about. Switch 2 editions are interesting. It seems like there's basically 3 versions of Switch 2 iterations of Switch 1 games, right? We've got the free Switch 2 updates, which are just free updates basically. So those are nice. And these are kind of getting the least attention because it's not really a big controversy, I guess. But like, these seem nice. These are just, Nintendo puts it as improved playability, and under that, it has some of the Switch's more infamous running games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and Link's Awakening, Echoes of Wisdom. So it seems like it's just gonna be like some small improvements to like performance and stuff. Maybe like load times will be better. That's nice, right? That seems nice. Then moving on, we've got like the big performance updates for Switch 2 edition. So that's gonna be stuff like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which we saw. Both of those games have 4K 60. Metroid Prime 4. That game has the quality mode versus performance modes. There seems to be some small additions to the games as well, like we got the Zelda notes or whatever, but it seems like the primary focus of those games is to provide performance updates to Switch 1 games, right? And then we've got like the big ones, the big Switch 2 editions, which basically have DLC. So, that's gonna be like Kirby and the Forgotten Land plus Star-Crossed World and Mario Party Jamboree plus, what's it called, like the Party TV or something. Those seem to be like Switch 1 games, plus the performance thing, plus also just like big major content updates, right? Those are sort of the 3 facets of this that we're looking at. It's interesting, right? Like it really varies between them. Like obviously the free updates, those are nice. And I hope that is a list that continues to expand. Because right now, it's not huge. But it's got some notable ones on there. It's got like I mentioned, it's got the 2D Zeldas, Scarlet and Violet. It's got Mario Odyssey on there. That's nice. 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. That also had some performance issues, so that's nice. Hopefully those just get smoothed out a little bit. The pricing here, it's sorry, it's not great. It's not great. That's kind of a running theme right now. It's tough. The whole thing is tough because the Switch 2, man, like the hype coming out of that direct was crazy, and then you kind of just got hit with this influx of the underbelly of certain things that kind of deflated a lot of the hype. I'm still very excited for the Switch 2. I'm very much looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be great, but it really is too bad that a lot of this stuff kind of took the wind out of some of the sales. Here's the thing about Switch 2 edition pricing, right? It goes off of the idea that Nintendo games don't drop in price, and that's really not great because like the thing is, that's something we dealt with through the entire Switch era, right? Like just there's a universal understanding that these games, like on a grand scale, obviously you got sales and stuff, and you got different bundles going throughout the era, but the general understanding was that these games on just like a firm price point angle are not going to drop. Breath of the Wild was $60 when the Switch launched, and it was $60 in 2024, right? That didn't change. But the thing is, this was the time to make those changes, really, when you're going off of, because essentially the Switch 2 edition pricing is them taking the price of the Switch game and then adding on to that what they believe the value of the upgrade is. So, Breath of the Wild, that was a $60 Switch game, plus the performance boost or whatever, that's $70. Forgotten Land, that's a $60 Switch game, plus the whole Star-Crossed World DLC, that's $20, so now that's an $80 release. And obviously, it doesn't sting as much as like Mario Kart World pricing, because obviously the presumption is that like that most people that are doing this are going to be going off of, they're just going to be upgrading their Switch version, So like in a vacuum, when you hear like $20 for Kirby Performance Boost and DLC, that doesn't sound unreasonable, right? When you hear $10 or free with Switch Online plus Expansion Pass, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom Performance Boost, that doesn't sound that bad. But it's really when you take a step back and just like look at it and you realize that Nintendo is selling any version of Breath of the Wild for $70 in 2025. That's an 8-year-old game, guys, you know? And that's the thing. And it feels like it could have been such an easy PR move to just like not do that, you know? Like if they came out here and said like, hey, Breath of the Wild, yeah, it's still, because that's the, you could basically keep the pricing the same, right? You could say Breath of the Wild, yeah, this is this is an 8-year-old Switch game. We're still selling it for $60, but it's the Switch 2 version. It has those performance boosts and it has that little bit of extra content, right? You could still sell that at $60. So essentially by saying that, you're being like, yeah, okay, we kind of did drop the value of the original game because now when we're adding this extra stuff, we are bringing it back up to that price. That seems so much more reasonable to me compared to selling Breath of the Wild for $70 in 2025, you know? Like it's just a tough sell. And especially this is something we got to talk about. This is outrageous, right? Like this is the thing is throughout this video, I've kind of been like, trying to both sides of the whole thing. I really don't think there's a both sides for this. Breath of the Wild does not come with its DLC. This is 8-year-old DLC for an 8-year-old game. If you want the entire Breath of the Wild experience on the Switch 2, you need to pay $90, right? There is no defense for that. Especially because when we look at other Switch 2 releases from other companies, Elden Ring, Street Fighter 6, they come packed in with the DLC. And these are recent games. These are games from 2023, 2022. These are relatively, compared to the Switch, relatively new games, right? They are featuring all of that on the Switch 2. And for I gotta check the Elden Ring price, but I know the Street Fighter, that's $60, right? So they included the DLC in that, and they're doing like the reduced price thing that I was saying, or maintained price, whatever, $60 for that. It's on a whole virtual game card thing. That's a whole other discussion. That doesn't really relate to pricing. That is annoying though, and we'll talk about that some other time. But they did all that. So for Nintendo to not include Breath of the Wild's DLC on the package, to me, that's just ridiculous, and I really can't see any argument defending that, especially because of the $70 thing. If it was $60 still, like I was suggesting, and it didn't have the DLC, then it's like, okay, that's still not great, but like, whatever, like it's kind of begrudgingly accept that. But the fact that it's $70 and doesn't feature the DLC, and the DLC is like 8 years old, like it's not like a booster course pass thing. This DLC came out Breath of the Wild launch year. To not have that to me is very silly when you have the Street Fighter 6 Year 1, Year 2, and Elden Ring Tarnished editions releasing right alongside it. That to me, that's not great. But you basically had the chance to do a whole Nintendo Selects thing where you're saying, yeah, we're dropping the prices of these Switch 2 editions and then kind of like bringing them back up with the Switch 2 integrations that we're adding to bring like a much more reasonable price point. Even just cutting $10 off of that Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom price or $10 off of that Kirby price, that means something. To have Kirby and, Kirby in the Forgotten Land, amazing game, and obviously a more recent game than Breath of the Wild, that was 2022. But still, to have that in any capacity with an $80 sticker price, it's a tough sell. It's not great. Okay, tariffs. We gotta talk about tariffs. Okay. The one thing in this video that really doesn't have that much to do with Nintendo, until they really measure their response, because obviously the tariffs are making the whole thing very volatile, and it's brewing uncertainty, so much so that Nintendo canceled their pre-orders in the US, and then I laughed about it, and then they canceled them in Canada, and it's like, what the heck, guys? Obviously, I know why they did it in Canada. It's still not great. Like, thanks, US. That's salt in the already gaping wound that's happened. But whatever. That's a that's a topic of conversation for not Protendo. Yeah, so tariff pricing. Obviously, Nintendo canceled the pre-orders in US and Canada. Doug Bowser came out and said that, because of the whole tariff thing, then some people came out and were like, oh, maybe the $450 price was anticipating tariffs, and then it was just more than they anticipated, so they had to change it again. Maybe it was planned to be $400, and then they had to sort of go in there and shift it at the last second, which is why they didn't really talk about it in the direct or anything. But Doug, so Nintendo had a really good out there. They could have just like allowed people to think that. And Doug Bowser came out and was like, no, that was before tariffs. Doug Bowser was like, no, stop. No, we set that price before tariffs, and now we have to re-examine what that price is going to be, right? So, that's not great, especially, and as a Canadian, I'm worried because I'm thinking, okay, we've already caught the blowback from pre-orders. What if Nintendo's worried about the US importing Canadian Switch 2s? So then we also get our price increase, That is something I've had to keep in mind. That is something that wouldn't be great because my whole Switch 2 fund is not built to accept tariff increases. The Mario Kart bundle here is already $700. So that would that would not be great if that happened. it's interesting to see what Nintendo's response is going to be. The situation is constantly changing and shifting. That's like the only thing, I made this video because it felt like the price thing, basically it settled down. We weren't getting new news every single day like we were for a second there. This is the only thing that's just going to constantly be shifting. Just before recording this, we got the announcement that PS5 prices were increasing in certain territories. In Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, the PS5 price was going up. And that's a system that is like 6 years old now, or 5 years old actually, I think. That is a system that is not new on the shelves. So it's like, what does that mean for Switch 2, right? That is tough. I think, at the end of the day, I really think Nintendo just has to eat the price on this one. It's not a good look no matter what. The Switch 2 is already in a bit of a difficult PR situation. The thing is, and it's not entirely Nintendo's fault, Misinformation has been completely insane for this system. And obviously, like I said, I think that in part some of that is because of Nintendo's communication not being clear. But in other parts, that is just it's gone rampant. The messaging has not been good because it's just outside of our circle, right? If you're watching this video, you are already in a small percent of the amount of people that are actually going to buy the Switch 2. A lot of casual fans have just completely warped perceptions of this. I'll go on TikTok or something and I'll see people under any Switch 2 thing, they'll be like, oh, but $90 games, which is not true. Or they'll be like, oh, but you don't even own the games you buy, which is also not true, So it is really in a tough PR situation. I really think they just need to eat the price here. I know Nintendo has that whole thing. They don't like to sell at a loss. They might already be selling at a loss based on the pre-existing tariffs. But I really think that's how you turn this around, hopefully with the Mario Kart bundle especially, you're probably lowering the impact, the financial impact they could have. I think if you're Nintendo, right, and the tariffs hit and it's outrageous, and obviously it's going to be more pricey for you to manufacture these systems because they're in China and Vietnam. I really think that is how you save this system's PR, to come out and be like, hey, things are more expensive. It's costing us more, but we're keeping the price the same. Because now you're not dropping the price. You're keeping the price the same, but it suddenly looks way better for you because it's oh, okay, Nintendo is, everything else is going up. PS5 even is going up, but Nintendo's holding strong here. They're just keeping things the same. Suddenly, a price that many consider to be unreasonable now looks a lot more reasonable, So I think as much, it probably would sting Nintendo to do that and not make as much on systems, but at the end of the day, you're going to make it back on software. I think that's really the move that they need to make. I think that's how they can sort of rescue this situation. Not that it really needs a bunch of rescuing. That's the thing. People live in this fantasy world. I've seen some people be like, oh, this is going to be another Wii U situation. The Switch 2 is going to sell 20 million units. There's not a chance. I'm sorry. As much as people want to push the whole speak with your wallet thing, which you absolutely should, buy what you think is valuable to you. I'll be getting a Switch 2 because I think it has value to me, but that doesn't mean it has value to everyone, But as much as people want to push that, this thing is going to sell really well. In all territories where it's available, we're already seeing pre-order shortages and everything, people not being able to get in. It's going to be a huge success. It's the Switch 2, right? There's not really a world where it's not going to be. So I think at the end of the day, to save whatever PR fire there is, which again, people are overselling, but just to douse some water on a little of the bad taste that some people might have, keeping the price the same, I think that would be a really good move. Probably, I'm not a business guy. There's probably a bunch of reasons not to do that. Just looking at the actual economical point of view. But from where I'm sitting, I'm okay, to me that makes sense. Last thing, right? Because I want to end this video on a bit more of a positive note, because the whole pricing situation obviously hasn't been stellar. But the last thing I want to talk about is Nintendo Switch Online, because I think Nintendo Switch Online, that's actually been pretty good so far, right? A lot of people going into this, especially when we were theorizing about them adding GameCube and them adding some future systems, right? People were okay, with the Switch 2, it'll probably come with another expansion pass, a third tier, where it's more expensive, you pay for more stuff, and you're getting more features the whatever the Switch 2 offers, the voice chat and at the time we didn't know everything it was going to offer, but that's what people were saying. And they didn't do that. The Switch 2 expansion pass, to this point, it's the same price, but you're getting a lot more. You're getting GameCube games. That's a major sell, right? Even I thought GBA was a huge sell for Switch Online expansion pass. GameCube is an even bigger sell, even if we only have 3 games at launch. GameCube being there, that's huge, right? That adds so much value to the system. And then on top of that, you're getting you get the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom upgrade editions for free with that. Or not for free, it's a subscription. But you get them alongside that with no extra charge. So I think they're doing a really good job of making NSO For $50, 50 US dollars per year, I think the expansion pass at this point, yeah, I think if you like playing retro games and, feels weird calling GameCube retro games, but if you like, if you like playing a lot of games and, you also get like all the DLC, you get like Mario Kart Booster Course Pass, you get like Happy Home Paradise, Splatoon 2 Octo expansion, those DLC stuff, yeah, I think NSO is looking pretty good right now. They could definitely, it's definitely possible for them, if they want to add like DS and stuff later, I could definitely see them doing another tier. It would be really nice if they just kept making the expansion pass just like really, really valuable, because I already think that right now, like compared to some other subscriptions, it's looking pretty good. And, hopefully they keep building on that, that's definitely one of the nice things that we've seen so far with, in terms of Switch 2 pricing. But, yeah, that's basically everything. Obviously want to end on something a little nicer because the whole thing isn't the best, something, like I said, it was kind of just like all these things coming together that have really led to a not great response and, misinformation being spewed and the whole thing. It's a little unfortunate, right? Because, Switch 2 discussion, like heading into this, it was a lot of hype, just a lot of excitement, and now it all feels like it comes with a bit of a footnote, like it feels like if you talk to someone who's like not really in our circle and just like, a regular person for Switch 2, like you really just can't talk about just like the Switch 2 excitement anymore, because it always comes with like, yeah, but the pricing, and I think that's a bummer, we like talking about this stuff. This stuff is exciting. I still watch like the trailers for Mario Kart and Bonanza and everything. Still very excited. In terms of software and the system itself, I'm still very excited. I'm trying not to let the whole thing dampen my mood about it too much, because at the end of the day, like, I have been looking forward to this, and I'm still looking forward to it. Hopefully some things, it feels funny to say, because things look to be heading in a possibly worse direction for reasons out of Nintendo's control. If anything, hopefully things somehow find a way to improve. At the end of the day, I would like everyone that wants this system to be able to get this system. That's really all we want. As many people as possible to have as much Switch 2 fun as they can. That would be ideal. Hopefully the pricing can eventually allow for that. And yeah, don't tell Nintendo that I'd pay $150 for Donkey Kong Bonanza, because I don't want them to know that.